You're tuned in to RX Radio.
You've adopted. Okay, hold on. We're gonna do this like adults. We're gonna do this like
What?
podcast hosts. Yeah, I
Oh,
know.
welcome,
Welcome
friend.
back to RX Radio. I am. I can't. Last episode we did the doctor thing, and I felt uncomfortable since. So I'm just
Yeah,
gonna say I am one of your hosts, Jordan Shallow, and with me, as always, now
yeah,
it's always.
yeah.
Uh, I'm gonna
It's
give you
been
the
a while.
doctor.
I've been stuck
Doctor,
to you for a while, man.
dude, I'm so sorry. It's just. Oh, what a giant tumor to have to deal with as contractually. And with my co-host, Dr. Jordan Jiunta. Welcome back to RX Radio. That's how podcasts apparently start. Can you believe that?
Yeah. People introduce themselves in such a way. I think, I think the thing is like people that don't usually listen, they have no idea who we are. Like it's just two voices, and they kind of just figure it out on the fly. So if you're new here, well, please stick around.
Welcome.
Please,
Yeah.
we'll give you
Tell
plenty
your
of reasons
friends.
not to in the next hour, but we're
Seriously.
hoping that
We,
you will.
we did start one episode a few months back by calling everyone a cocksucker.
Yeah,
That gives you some idea of what you're about to put yourselves through.
right.
But no, welcome back to the show. Today we wanted to explore, and I think the title will be one thing and the episode will be something entirely different. So sit down, grab some popcorn as we kind of fumble our way through this. um, Habits of strong people, because
Yeah.
I think there is, it is buzzwordy, it is clickbaity, it does sort of follow in like this 10 commandments rules for life type thing. But I think of all things that are a byproduct of habitual behavior, strength I think is probably one of the things closest linked to that, right? Like,
Hmm.
there is a skill component to strength, but there's also like a logarithmic component to strength as compared to like seven habits of good basketball players. It's like, well, look, man, you're probably dealing with like a genetic variable that's hard to overcome, a particular glass ceiling in the skill of basketball, not one to mention the height of you as an individual, right? Like that's a massive correlating. I forget the statistic of the likelihood of you playing in the NBA as a person over 7 feet tall is like absurd.
100%.
100. And if you're not, like, you're just a fucking window licker if you can't figure it
Yeah.
out. Like, come on, it's like literally doing taekwondo against children. Like, it can't be that hard. Or like there's a statistic about being American, born in American Samoa, and the likelihood of you making the NFL. It's something like, compared to the other states in America, it's something to the effect of 65 to 70% more likely to make it to
Yo.
the NFL if you're born in American Samoa. However, everyone has the potential to be stronger. And I think habits are going to be the thing that will consistently get someone stronger, because strength is, under a microscope, it is what you do in the gym, air quotes. It doesn't have to be that, right? Like, you and I both grew up kind of in the sticks, I guess, like not in a big city. And we probably had friends in rural communities that were just farmer strong. That's what we used to call them. Like, there were kids who played hockey that were, I'm going to name some communities in southwestern Ontario that I'm sure no one's ever heard of, but like Harrow or Wheatley or Essex. Like, these are literally like corn and tomato farm towns. And you had kids that walked into, 10th grade, 11th grade, sat down on a bench press and just ripped 2 plates, and they'd never touched a bench before. But for a
Mhm.
lot of people who aren't, growing up home on the range, the gym and what they do in weight training is probably going to be their peak exposure to physical activity. So there's the obvious habit of weight training, and there's a lot to discuss in the habits of weight training that actually make you progressively stronger over time. But there's a lot in the lifestyle that you choose when it comes to trying to maximize or optimize your outcomes for strength that I think are equally as worth looking into. Now, unfortunately, given the state of affairs in today's resistance training paradigm, how it intersects with popular culture and what's kind of in vogue in the health and fitness space right now, I do think we actually have to have a deliberate conversation about the strength training side. But I think equally as important is having a conversation about the habits of strong people across the board. And I say that it's a shame that we have to have the conversation about the actual resistance training side, because it should be fucking obvious, but it's not. There's been a lot of obscurity around strength and the intersection with solving this problem in social media's opinions on getting strong and training paradigms, etc. So there's two ways to look at it. There's the general lifestyle of people that are strong, and then there's the more specific training habits that people get into in order to try and get stronger. So where do you want to put your stake in the ground for the first habit of strong people?
So there's a lot of things we can touch on here, and we will, but I think a lot of it is around how people structure their day and the things that they choose to do on a day-to-day basis. But I think the single most important trait, that I don't know if it's a trait or a habit, but it's something that's ingrained in the strongest people that I know, is you have to habitually challenge yourself, right? You have to do hard things and overcome, because and this is, I'd say, particularly relevant with the climate around the discussions with strength training, and some of the different approaches that we'll see now. Some of them are overly analytical, some of them are still like bro science, like dumb and barbaric, but almost everyone I've seen get strong in my life, they've done it in a suboptimal way. They've done it in not the most effective way, but they've worked as hard as they fucking can for a long period of time. And that's in their DNA. That's something that they're going to do no matter what. And I think that is a trait that, combined with this new wave of exercising correctly, those two things is really potent and really dangerous if you're trying to get strong. Like dangerous in like a positive sense, not dangerous in like a you're going to get hurt sense. But like I'm not the strongest guy, but like relative to my size and the things that I've done, I've made it pretty far in strength sports. But something I've noticed was that it was ingrained in me from my wrestling days. And like I've seen this, man, where I grew up, I'm sure it's like the farmer strength you're talking about. Like people are just tough. People are hard there. Like you grew up in cold weather, like you're a bit harder than I'm in California now. People here, pussies, big fucking pussies. That's just a general consensus. But a lot of the people I grew up like in the mindset around wrestling, and I see it echo its way into like MMA and combat sports as well. But it's like go hard or go home. Like every day is your last day in the gym, and that's something that like I don't see a lot in a lot of people. Like I remember I moved out to California. I started competing in CrossFit, and I went in the CrossFit gym, and like I learned about CrossFit as a vector for competition. I didn't know about it in the sense of like, 40-year-old soccer moms like doing this 9:30 on a Tuesday because it's like an exercise class. Like I didn't understand. That was like a weird deviation for me. I'm like, no, like you're here to like kill yourself in the gym and go as hard as you can and bleed from your lungs, and then go home and do it again tomorrow. So there's this certain hardness, this ability to seek out challenges and seek out things that are very difficult for you to obtain. And that's something that's number one for me. If you want to get strong and you want to get like dangerously strong, like stronger than everyone else around you, you need to be that person that like you're going to show up in the gym and you're going to fucking kill yourself, and you're going to go and you're going to, we'll talk about the more kind of finite habits, the things that are just responsible for training. You'll eat a bunch of food, you'll sleep well, you'll stay hydrated. I mean, you're going to come back and you're going to do it again tomorrow, and you're going to do it the next day, and you're going to feel broken for weeks and months and years on end before you get to that place where you're strong. You may never get there. If the people that I've known that have pursued this, like, yeah, they're stronger than most people, but they're never there. Like they're never like, I'm strong, I'm good, I'm going to stop now. Like it's something that it's just this driving force inside of people that like you're going to challenge yourself no matter what you do. And I think that really echoes into like a lot of things that we've talked about in the past, and like even like the way that we'll talk about deloading. It's like we're not just going to decrease load, we're going to give you a variation that's self-limiting, and you're going to go as hard as you fucking can on that. But there's going to be less collateral in terms of neurological fatigue, in terms of physiological fatigue. There's going to be less of a recovery debt because of the constraints that we've given you. So I think for me, the number one thing in terms of, we'll call it a habit, but I think it's deeper than that, is you have to be willing to seek out challenges on a continual basis.
Yeah, you bring up something interesting that I don't think anyone's ever touched on. And it's a fairly
Sick.
well-known phenomenon in like psychological literature, but I would assume it would bleed its way into physiology as well. And it's around the idea of DNA and genetics. Because
Mm,
it's so easy to scapegoat genetics. And I think whenever we talk about resistance training, strength, hypertrophy, genetics gets kind of, it gets pigeonholed into like you either have it or you don't.
mm,
But I mean, I would say the most accurate way to look at genetics is what's classified as a study called epigenetics, right? Epigenetics is this idea where, your DNA, your genetic makeup puts a bullet in the chamber and your environment pulls the trigger, right? So it's a symbiotic relationship of nature and nurture. And I think to a large part that's true, but I think when people talk about genetics in the realm of strength sports or aesthetics or athleticism, I think they forget that genetics themselves are a bit of a fluid medium. What I mean by that is genes and their expression can be and are triggered by exposures to stress.
right.
So the genetics you have, sure, there's a predetermined codification of how exposures to stress will manifest genes and their expression, but you have to expose them to stress. So you really don't know what you can become. And this is where the physical and the psychological sort of like merge. You don't know what you can become until you willingly expose yourself to that stress.
Mhm.
So, it's very easy for people. And I know people who, you know, they have small hands and they just go, well, my genetics. And they just like fucking scuttle off to a Pilates class. And you're like, my guy, like, not all hope is lost on you, my small gloved friend. Like, you can still turn it on, and what you can turn on is the expression of latent or dormant genes that need the exposure of stress to actually manifest as adaptations or signaling processes within the body. So it's funny because you mentioned that all the strong people got there by what we would classify theoretically and academically as inefficient path. But
Right.
it's the inefficiency in the path that I think expresses the genes through the exposure of what could be unnecessary stress in a proper environment, but it's completely necessary to get the gene expression that you need in order to be someone who is now has the genetics to get to a certain place, right? So, and genetics are a tricky conversation. When you're in the presence of good genetics.
Yeah.
When like we've
It's
been
different.
around athletes and you're just like, oh,
Yeah.
okay. Now you have you have an opportunity. Like when you see the best athletes in the world, you're like, okay, can we take this bullet, this silver bullet, this armor piercing golden-eyed 007 one shot kill bullet of genetics, and can we put it in the barrel of a proper training environment or proper habitual lifestyle environment? And that's where you start to see just the entails of human performance, right? That's where you see the fastest and the biggest and the
Yeah.
most powerful and the best at any given athletic endeavor. But a lot of people think genetics are binary, and they're not. So, and I think especially now with this, the language in the strength and hypertrophy space, in the more generic general population, fitness meets Instagram meets TikTok. And there's this idea of like stimulus to fatigue ratio. And it's like, okay, when we talk about like, doing only the right amount of volume to stimulate what's necessary, it's like, let me tell you about being really strong. It is completely unnecessary.
Yeah.
Like when you get really, really strong, it negatively affects the rest of your life, like
Yeah.
in a very meaningful way. But that's because it is so unnecessary.
Mhm.
It is so unnecessary to have extra physiological strength. Now, you want to have like, good strength to body weight ratio. Sure. Your body will aid in that process up until which point that process becomes inefficient to the process of survival, right?
Yeah.
We are optimized for survival. We are not optimized for strength, right? We are optimized for strength as so far as we are optimized for survival, and strength is a utility in that optimization process. But past that, there is no more. So, you are getting strong in spite of your survival if you're trying to get really strong. So you need to understand that optimization is really a law of averages, or a reversion to the mean, if you will. You're trying to find that mid part of the bell curve of efforts and outputs, where it's like, no. When you're optimizing for like genetic expression of stress exposure and how that could help, how that could really help turn things on in the genetic category to the best that your predetermined codification of your genes will allow for, you need that fatigue. You need those inefficiencies. You need those prolonged stressors, right? And it's that helps really from a base code level start to realize your potential of strength, right? Because you're not going to reach your true genetic potential without exposures of undue stress, right? Like trying to just hit the ball out of the park and do what's necessary to stimulate hypertrophy and then go home. It's like, oh, this isn't for you, because you're not going to reach the threshold to, stimulating muscle protein synthesis and, building new muscle tissue. That's like the main floor. The amount of stress you need to put your body under to express latent genes, that's like the 10th floor, right? And between the first floor and the 10th floor is all of the fatigue that people are afraid of, right? So I would say, to kind of throw my hat in the ring and dovetail off of what I think is like such an undervalued point, is the dynamic nature of genetic expression due to stress exposure, is the idea of strong people do more.
Yeah.
Right? Strong people do the extra set. Strong people do the extra rep. Strong people carry all the groceries in from the car, right? Strong people they do more. And no one, and look, okay, I've been on the other side of it. I know the strongest guys in the world. I've been in the room with your world's strongest men. I've been in the room with the strongest powerlifters. Like, I've been there where records have fallen. There is a point where it's like, okay, yeah, Dan Bell is going to deadlift maybe once a month, right? Sure, that's him, doing less. There's a strategy, but for most people, and I would say 99.999% of the time, most people need to get in the habit of doing more, right? Do that drop set, do that rest pause set, do that extra workout. Don't take that day off, right? Like, there is to use a term, a pussification, if you will. I believe that's a term pussification out of California.
Right.
Is that the correct term?
Yeah.
Okay.
Origin.
Or yes, the etymology of the word pussification comes out of Latin English, California.
Yeah.
It's a noun to describe an adjective to a bunch of pussies. The process of becoming a huge pussy.
Yeah, big pussy.
And it permeates down to a crowd that needs to hear that they need to do more, right? Yeah. So I think one of the issues in the hyper optimization crowd is like, what are you optimizing for? Sure, if you're optimizing for hypertrophy, the threshold or the floor you have to get off of is the main floor. Yeah, okay, cool. Your reps slowed down. You're between the reps 1 to 30. You're in 1 to 3 RIR. You're doing 10 to 20 sets per muscle group a week. You're training at least 3 times a week, ideally training each muscle group twice a week, maybe 3 in some cases. That's it. That's where we're at. That's like the research. That's like that's a meta-analysis, peer-reviewed fucking, PubMed. And you know what? For the outcome of putting on a bit of tissue, sure, you eat in a moderate deficit, you get protein, maybe you sleep every now and then, and you're kind of halfway there. But strength, like strength to the point where it's a topic of conversation, right? Strength when we're to a point of where people around you are attributing feats of strength to you that are actually impossible, but they think you can do it. Right? Like, oh, like, you can lift a car. Ma'am, I can't. Like, not even close to it. But it's like that type of strength that goes above and beyond. And how do you go above and beyond? By going above and beyond,
Yeah.
right? So I think my first habit would be strong people do more, period.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think a good point to go along with that and to really put these pussies in their place is that what you see from like everyone is so accessible nowadays. Like the strongest people in the world, they're on your phone, they're on your screen, and you can see what they're doing in training. And I think a really important point to realize is the things that got them there are not the things that are going to perpetuate that, right? They're not the things that are going to get, I don't know who Dan Bell is because I don't pay attention to anyone. But if this guy's deadlifting once a month, like that's not what got him to the point where he's strong enough that deadlifting once a month is going to be a thing that continues to push the envelope, right? There was a point where he was probably in the gym deadlifting 2-3 times a week, maybe even more, because the thing about strong people, they're a little bit retarded. And I'm speaking from experience. but 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 the important thing to understand is that like this person that is so accessible to you, their training is so accessible to you, it's not recreating what they're doing right now that's going to get you to the place that they're at or the relative place. Like most people will never be there. And that's okay. Like it's the genetic potential is just not there. And there's going to be this point where someone who is a genetic outlier gets in the right environment and they have the right stimulus to become this much greater than everyone else. And that's sick. Like, fuck yeah. But that's probably not you. That's probably not anyone listening to this podcast. Maybe it is because we have some strong people that listen. But that's not the majority of people, right? So for you to get to your relative potential of that, it's you have to do more. You have to work harder. You have to put yourself in a place that's going to necessitate adaptation. And that needs to be habitual. Like that's not it's it's Friday, I'm well rested. I ate 30 extra carbs last night. I'm going to go for one extra set today. No. That's that's everything you do in life. Like it doesn't start and end in the gym. It's like some of the strongest people I know are some of the most successful people I know in other aspects of life. Like they operate successful businesses. They're high performers in their job. Like maybe they have a family and they're like a really good family man. Like that carries into other aspects of life because that's a trait, that's a habit that doesn't start and end in the gym. That's a habit that carries with you. And that's like something that you're going to apply to every task that you do is you're going to learn to do it well and you're going to do it until you can do it well. And it's no different with training, no different with strength. So that's definitely, I think, the crux of this conversation is like, are you willing to put yourself in the position to continually fail for the rest of your life? Because that's what strength training is you never win. You're never going to get there. You're never going to beat gravity. Gravity wins 100% of the time. But are you willing to accept that and still try your hardest every single time, knowing that every single session now until the rest of forever, you're going to fail? Like, do you have that in your DNA that you're willing to try that hard? And most people know, and that's okay. You'll always be a pussy, but that's fine. But
But I think with that, you bring up a good point is like, because sometimes failing is getting injured.
right.
A lot of times, I've never met a strong person. I tore my right pec 2 weeks before a meet in 2020, and a week after I tore it, I was meant to deadlift at the animal cage before flying over to Australia to compete at Pro Raw. And I showed up to the animal cage and I was bruised from my wrist to my pelvis from how bad I tore my pec. And I was thinking like, oh, fuck, like I'm going to try and deadlift because if I tear my pec here, then it's probably easier for me to get surgery in North America than Australia. So I'd much rather tear it in Columbus, Ohio than in Melbourne, Australia. So I'm like, all right, I'll like work up to what I can. And if my fucking pec rips, what's left of my pec rips off my bone, I'm in Ohio. And I started thinking like, as I was going into the cage, like, fuck, man, like I'm walking into this thing. Like, I don't know, the cage pre-COVID was like kind of a cool thing to be able to lift at. And it was the strongest dudes in the world, like legitimately the strongest dudes in the world.
Yeah.
You know, Dan Green was there, Milanichev was there, Herbert was there, Andy Wong was there. Like, you know, you had everyone had 2,000 plus pound total in the room. And I was like, fuck, here I am showing up as like probably, if not the weakest guy. And I'm like battered and bruised from like a 440 bench. Like I'm pretty sure Milanichev can do that with one hand. And like the amount of respect I got for showing up with, and the amount of guys who showed me their scars, that was like my ticket in. And I thought it was like my way out. Like, and everyone was like, holy fuck, dude, like you have a pec that's barely hanging onto the bone, and like you're going to come in here and deadlift because it's easier for you to get it reattached in North America than in Australia. Like that's the strong mentality. And I was
That's the
like, man,
mindset it takes. Yeah.
right. And I thought like I thought I was just going to be kind of laughed away as like some guy that, I don't know, that pulled like 675 or 700 or something like that. And it wasn't the heaviest lift by any stretch of the imagination, but everyone was hyped because you're like, yeah, this guy's like kind of bleeding internally from a muscle tear a week ago. Like that's but it's like, you have to be able to accept that. Like I walked into one of the best powerlifting gyms in the world, and it was like, there's quad tendon ruptures, there's bicep tendons, there's fucking shattered pelvic bones from torn adductors and torn abs. Like that's, but along each one of those is a world record.
Yeah. Yeah. It's insane. That's the mindset. It's like, and that's what almost necessitates that evolution of doing everything you can to doing what you need to do. Right. As you go till the wheels fall off, because they're going to eventually, like you'll never meet someone that's done something great that hasn't hurt themselves doing the thing that they're great at. Right. And that's going to be the thing that necessitates them to look into it and be like, all right, how can we become more efficient with this? How can we incur less collateral with training? And that's going to be the thing that continues because to take a step back, these people that are doing this, it's not like they just stumbled upon strength training and got amazing at it right away, right? There needs to be a lifespan long enough to allow for that much growth in training, right? So you need to train for, I don't know, a decade at least. Some of these, like some people with great genetic potential will come in, they'll blow up and they'll get really good really quickly, or they'll use supplementation that will allow that growth to happen faster. But at the same time, there needs to be a lifespan long enough to do something great. Like no one gets strong out of nowhere and then continues to perform at a high level without incurring some sort of injury. So that's kind of a pivotal point in training. That's like, all right, what I've been doing to this point, it led me to where I'm at right now, incurring this injury. How can I continue to push the envelope, get better without having that same injury? And I think that's an important part to notice too, is like, if you want to be strong, if you want to be outlier strong, you're going to hurt yourself in the process. There's no way around it. Like even people that are barely outlier strong, like they have injuries along the way. People that are no one in the strength world, they have injuries along the way. Like people that are just not even strong. Like there's people in California here that have gotten injured and they're not strong. But understanding like this, it's not a healthy endeavor, and you need skin in the game, and you need to accept the risk of what you're doing and understand that the thing you're pursuing is more important to you than your health in the process. And that's kind of, it goes along with challenging yourself in this very inconvenient, impractical way over a long period of time. Is like, there's going to be collateral, and that collateral is literally your health and your body. And if you're not willing to accept that, you're never going to get to that place.
And I would argue that, like, by definition, outcomes that we value because not many people can achieve them, right? Like,
Yeah.
there's a scarcity to what the outcome is that makes it worth having, right? Like if everyone just could be strong, being strong wouldn't be valued. To what degree being strong is valued. And, there are times where just the look of being strong has gotten me out of situations that may have not gone the same way for someone else. Like I've seen, junkies and crackheads look really sober when I walk into a room, and it's like, okay, I'm not like a fighter or anything like that, but they don't know. And I might look like a really bad guy to some guy strung out on crack. But it's like, the point being, because the conversation about health is interesting, because one of the reasons that getting strong is scarce and therefore valuable is because of the inherent risk that it could have with your health. And that, I think, gives an implicit value to it that is so high, because so few people are willing to sacrifice their health for it, which is ironic because so many people don't realize that they're sacrificing their health to equal amounts in the pursuit of not being strong. Yep. Right. Like at the end of the day, and this is where like the longevity crowd, I think, is basking in mediocrity and headed for an average lifespan, is they're not running towards anything. they're running away from something. And it's like, man, that's not motivation, right? That's not striving, right? That's just trying to survive long enough. Like, and like there are people who talk about health span, and I don't want to straw man the argument for the longevity crowd, but they're looking at slowing the rate of degradation. They're not looking at getting stronger. They're not looking at they're looking at slowing the inevitable process of aging, which is fine. And I'm sure there's some Illuminati type adrenochrome kid eating crowd that's out there somewhere that's like trying to get you more youthful every year and actually move the needle, but it doesn't take all of that, Alex Jones type shit to actually do it. Like I know people who are consistently getting stronger into their later years. And, if you're trying to push the needle, unfortunately, metaphorically or figuratively, you're having to sacrifice health. And it's like, if you're not, you're likely not in the conversation of those actually strong. And that's okay. But it just shows that where your values are at. Right. So, finding alignment of something I talk about, like you don't act a certain way after you become something. Right? You have to act the way of a person that becomes that thing. You know what I mean? Like we
Those
try and
behaviors precede the accomplishment.
Exactly. So this is what we tell like our coaches in the level 3 program. Like when people come out to level 3, there's an expectation. Now, most people who have never trained pro athletes before, but we demand of them, the students who come through Prescript level 2 and obviously level 1, to become the person who trains pro athletes before you train pro athletes, right? Because that's how you get to train pro athletes. Is you train, the lady that works in the accounting firm, you train her like she's a pro athlete. Now, I'm not saying and I don't want people to go away, because I detest this as like an ethos. Like, you don't go away and have her do like box jumps while she's 40 pounds overweight, right? Like that's not what I mean by training them like a pro athlete. It's like training them with the respect and attentiveness and professionalism that would be expected of that, to train someone who does that for a living, right? That provides food on the table for their family, and potentially in a lot of cases their extended family and generations past them. These people take it seriously. So whether or not your goal is to train a pro athlete or not, that's not what level 3 is about. The level 3 is about taking your job seriously. It's about becoming a professional, right? And you need to become that professional before you become a professional. You need to embody the habits of professionalism and all that comes with it. And then the opportunities to enact that professionalism in a professional setting will be afforded to you as a byproduct of that. Right. And not the other way around. Like you're not going to get where you're going using the operating system that got you where you are. Right. Similar to your dissection of the Dan Bell. Like, yeah, Dan deadlifts once a month, but he didn't become Dan Bell by deadlifting once a month. Right. So don't try and, compare pages in each other's stories without realizing what chapter that each person is in. Right. So I think there's something to be said about the health side of things. And, are some pursuits of strength worth the health collateral? Well, no, because if the health collateral decreases your strength, then it's obviously a negative net impact. Right. So there's obvious guardrails to this that I don't want people going off and just using, becoming a context vulture and wrapping this up into context of like, well, what if this, and then you get, kidney failure. It's like, well, yeah, man, like don't have trend for breakfast every day. Like that's not what we're saying, but we're saying like, it's going to be, strong people are going to broadly be like, taking that extra rep or that extra set where their knee hurts or their elbow hurts, or, they didn't sleep well. Look, for most people, trust me, the sleep thing, and I get it. And I've read the research, but I've also anecdotally been on the other side of it. Like, sleep is such a governor to your output that whatever you can do is what you could have done. It sounds like a weird, useless totality, but like if I sleep bad, I still trying to go in the gym and kill myself. because the degree to which I am physiologically and psychologically capable of doing so is governed by my state of poor sleep.
Yeah.
Right? Like if I would have trained every day I've rested in the last 20 years, I would have trained 4 times. Right? So this idea, and to go back to our phrase, and maybe this is what we call the episode, the pussification of the human being, is that this sleep is, I'm really glad that the benefits of sleep are making its way to the forefront of popular culture. And at the same time, I am deeply saddened by what I'm seeing as a byproduct, because it is so easy to scapegoat, right? Like you hear a podcast clip where someone bangs on about the importance of sleep, and it's like, yeah, cool. I get it. Your performance isn't going to be what it is, but it's another performance. It's another exemplar of the habit that you have to become to be strong. And it's going to be fortifying to your long-term pursuit if you can opt to do more in times when other people do less, right? When someone goes, I heard a podcast and I decided to go home and nap, great. That's a head that I get to step on to be stronger than the rest of the crowd, right? So it's like, and it blows my mind that logic isn't more pervasive, that like, okay, do what you can as hard as you can and kind of make hay while the sun shines, because your physiological governor is set, but it doesn't mean you can't drop the fucking foot to the floor, and there's not going to be a benefit of learning how to put the foot through the floor.
Yeah. Being strong is performing in less than ideal conditions. Always. Like anyone who's set a world record, they're at a disadvantage. They're working against less than ideal conditions because they're trying to fight gravity harder than anyone's ever fought gravity before. Right? That's an impossible feat until it's possible. Right? So you're taking an impossible situation and you're proving that it's possible. Like and to go with your point around like, sleep and doing the things that maybe align with health, maybe don't align with health, like I'll double down this whole fucking podcast. The only quality you need to be strong is doing the hard thing, continually doing the hard thing. And sometimes that looks a little bit different than what you think it looks like, because sometimes doing the hard thing is getting to bed an hour earlier. Sometimes doing the hard thing is eating an extra 30 grams of protein, an extra 100 or even an extra 1,000 calories a day. Like it's the hard thing is not the convenient hard thing. It's not going in the gym and training hard because that's what you want to do. The hard thing sometimes is pulling back in the gym. The Dan Bell situation, like someone gets in that position because they love training, right? Maybe their love for training makes it really hard for them to pull back in deadlifts once a week when they want to, once a month when they want to do it once a week, right? So continually doing the hard thing, not the convenient thing, that's what it takes to be strong. And that's what's going to allow you to be able to continue to push the envelope, is when you recognize like, okay, I'm doing the thing that I want to do. I'm training hard in the gym, but is this effective? And you're going to get to a point where there's diminishing returns on everything. Maybe you are having trend for breakfast every day, but there's going to be diminishing returns on that too. Right? So it's the hard thing might be doing less trend and eating your vegetables and getting to sleep an hour earlier. So are you willing to do the hard thing in that situation where the hard thing isn't the convenient thing? It's not the thing that you want to do. It's the thing that's hard to do because it's fucking hard to do. And other people aren't willing to do it. But if you're willing to push yourself in every single one of those aspects, then that's the thing that's going to allow you to find growth or find strength where other people can't, because they want to do the thing that's convenient, not the thing that's hard to do.
A lot of times the thing that's hardest to do and getting strong is shutting the fuck up.
Yeah, I wish everyone would just shut the fuck up,
dude. Everybody's
indefinitely.
Look, right. And because you brought up an interesting thing about the hard thing and the hard convenient thing, right? Like,
Right.
because there's a push in, general physical culture right now that is indiscriminate of those two factors, of the hard thing and the hard convenient things. And obviously, like, maybe not obvious, but I'm ripping on like the cold tub immersion, cold plunge thing. That's a hard convenient thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's a hard convenient thing where you've convinced yourself that this is moving the needle for you.
Right.
It's not. And here's the thing, like, recovery is not an identity. It's not. And if it is, it's a really shitty
So
one.
many
And I
people are gonna be pissed off to hear that.
and
So
I
many
would take,
Californians.
oh my God. I mean, I would like I would much rather, and always have, and I really wanted more than anything else as a kid to be identified as the strong guy.
Mhm.
Because, like, you know, at the end of the day, if the spaceship is going up and they're only taking a few with us to the next planet, and I can open pickle jars that other people can't, maybe I've thought like that was it. Like, okay, I'm used to someone for something, right? Like, there's something utilitarian. He may not be the dumbest, or he may not be the smartest. He might actually be the dumbest. But man, can that kid open a fucking jar of pickles? And that alone was like, okay,
Something about a
I'll
jalapeno in a sauna. I don't know.
right. Oh, for Jesus fuck's sake. But you know, there's something utilitarian. My identity, and like this is something I struggled with getting older, but I'm on the other side of it now. But for a really long time, I would say from 17 to, I don't know, 27 maybe, I didn't have an identity outside of being the strong guy.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and I tell you what, if I got to pick identities off the shelf, being the strong guy as an identity, yeah, pretty good. Pretty good. I got to say, not bad. The residual of being the strong guy for a decade of your life and the habits that come with it.
Mhm.
Because I'll tell you, and here's one that drives me insane, to maybe get back to our list of habits of strong people. And it's something now that people are starting to do and starting to like proclaim on social media, that is kind of driving me nuts, because I've never proclaimed it to anyone. I don't see myself in a position to make proclamations of the kind, but it was something that it was inherently obvious to me at the age of 18. And that's, don't drink alcohol.
God.
I can't believe that this is like an edgy thing that people are getting social points for. I have not, and look, I'm not asking for a pat on the back, nor do I have a medallion anywhere, which is like usually the sentiment whenever I tell people I haven't drank in 16 years. They take one look at me and go like, oh, you go to meetings. I'm like, no, I realized very quickly that it was a dumb thing to do, because I grew up in a place where like you saw the alcoholism lead to drug use, physical abuse, you know, incarceration. And I was like, wait, what was the first thing that this guy did? Oh, he drank. Oh, so if I don't do that, then like all the other stuff probably less likely. Oh, okay, I'm just not going to do that, right? I'm just not going to do the thing that is going to fuck up my potential for my entire life, right?
Yeah.
So it's something that I was just, it blows my mind. And I won't entertain the conversation now. I won't entertain the conversation with someone who wants to be strong and isn't willing to give up alcohol. And I don't give a fuck if it's I don't know, like, unless it's a hard no, leave me alone. Like,
Mhm.
and this is when I work with pro athletes, I will not entertain why my camera keeps cutting in and out. But when I work with pro athletes, it's literally a prerequisite to them working with me is they have to be willing to cease alcohol consumption, period.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Doing the hard thing that's inconvenient. Like, especially when you're a pro athlete, you have all the money in the world. Like, you have all the social access in the world. Like, that's not an easy thing to do. But if you're focused on performance, it's an easy choice to make. Like, yeah, that's it's actually not that hard if your priorities are in the right place. Because the thing about being strong, and like we've kind of touched on this, but it's very inconvenient. There is this bell curve of like, okay, people that aren't strong, that's detrimental to your health. People that are incredibly strong, that's also detrimental to your health. But the thing about being strong is it's incredibly transient. Like, no one is the strongest forever or even for a meaningful amount of time. Like, that's something that you can only possess that trait for a finite amount of time. And once you peak, like, okay, the injuries add up. You get to a point where it's just unattainable to continue to push the envelope further and further. It's very hard earned, and it's very quick to go away. That's the thing, is because you need to be able to train at an intensity that perpetuates you not only being as strong as you are, which is harder to do the stronger you get, but continuing to get stronger past that. And that's something that there's a very short shelf life on. So if, like, being strong is a very not rewarding endeavor, aside from, like, the identity of being the strong guy, like, yeah, fuck yeah, that's sick. And people that pursue strength to that end, like the strongest people that have ever walked this earth, that will carry with them for a period of time. But it is an identity that people take. And I think that you see on the other side that once they no longer can execute on being the strongest power lifter, the strongest man, weightlifter, whatever it is, like that's a mental challenge for those people to undergo, because you can only wear that crown for so long. Like the second you put it on, it's the clock's ticking until you're dethroned. So it's something that's, it's very not rewarding in that sense, that you go through this personal pursuit, and it has to be a personal pursuit. Like you can't do this with any sort of like external motivators or any sort of, unpure intentions, because unless your intention is to pursue strength to that degree, you're not going to get there, and it's going to be short-lived while you're there. So it's a very selfish and a very short-lived endeavor. So it's tough, man.
And I think when we talk about, I like that idea of like, the second you put a crown on, it's just a countdown to when you're going to be dethroned. When we're talking about situations where we're discussing the strongest in the world, this is where the epigenetic situation is so that you can be the strongest in the world, right? Like you have all of the tools at your disposal. And with those tools oftentimes come the more damaging collateral. What we mean by that is when you sit down with former world's strongest man, and I can think of a handful that I've spoken with that are, they're on the other side of what their genetic potential could do, both good and bad. Mm-hmm. For most people, striving to be that, you will fail miserably at becoming anything near that at all. But you bring up an interesting point about the transient window of this adaptation. Like strength is, primarily a young man's game.
Yeah.
Right. Because you have a resiliency, because you have, you haven't incurred the collateral of doing strong guy things or girl things for a long time. As long as you're still relatively intact, that's a massive advantage in being strong. However, I look at the transient nature of strength, and I look at like the long-term arc of physiological adaptations over a lifespan. And I think of the way that you used to program for CrossFit, and you would look at a competition and a particular date, and you would look at the subsets and the sub skills within the sport of CrossFit. And obviously you had a really strong Olympic weightlifting background. Like, I thought you were always crazy good at gymnastics for,
Thanks,
with
man.
your wrestling background and being strong. And you could walk on your hands, you could do shit on rings. And, there were components you were better at and components that you weren't. And then the way I recall you preparing for competitions would be the things that you needed more practice at, you started way earlier in your prep. So like, let's say, for example, you needed more practice on like the cardiovascular side, because this event may have like a longer duration run. You're going to start giving yourself exposures to that particular training stimulus far earlier than someone that you're good at, right? Like you could not ollie lift an entire, 16-week prep or 12-week prep or 8-week prep for a competition, show up on the day, do a couple snatches and cleans in the warm-up room, and be good to wipe the floor with anyone in the competition. But you needed that extra time, that extra training time to practice the things you're not good at. I feel like strength training in a particular window of time in your life follows a similar arc, where it's like your best to get in when you fit in, right? Like your best to get as strong as possible, as young as you can, so you can coast that strength into the rest of your life, right? Because we talked about a month ago now, we did an episode on detraining, probably one of our more like, poignant, cited, almost like a webinar about detraining. And what you see is that transient strength changes, decrease in strength from detraining, happen last, right? So they hold on the longest, where like VO2 max and endurance and aerobic capacity, those are like a little bit more fleeting in and out, and you have to keep kind of touching them. Where I think even in the arc of a lifespan, where hopefully the habits of a strong person remain with you the entire time, if you are later in life and you've built this reserve, this bank account of strength, that's going to carry with you into every other physiological adaptation that you might then try to move, right? Like if you have a base of strength that's immutable, that is built off of really trying to push the envelope in a time when you could, when you get to an older age, you're not going to be bottlenecked by the same things that are, working adjacent to the Grim Reaper, right? Like if your strength, if you could squat 2-3 times your body weight, one of the tests of mortality is like how long it takes you to get up out of a chair, right? Right.
Not
And
doing so well right now.
right. But I guarantee when you're in your 60s or your 70s, like look at your old man, right?
Yeah.
Like drive on his property and watch how quick that guy gets out of his fucking chair, right? Like he woke up early to get out of his chair. So it's like, but there's other markers that are more accurate, like VO2 max. What good is it fucking testing a VO2 max if someone can't get out of their chair? Yeah. Right? If someone falls over and can't get up because they're not strong enough, VO2 max is a really shitty proxy because they can get taken out by a bar of soap in the shower, right? Like it's that window. And look, there's some people listening to this in their like 20s and 30s that are out running 5Ks and they're out running color runs, or they have like their run group. And it's like, my guy, not the time. There's time for that later. There's time for the pussification shit later, right? Right now, we got strength to build. Okay. You got like a decade, maybe. And we're like, I don't know, dude, like I'll fight it tooth and nail with every fucking compound I can find. But like we're 35 this year.
Yeah.
And it's like, we're probably about as close to peak strength. I peaked way earlier than that. I'm sure of it. And I got the dents in the fender, but like I still decently strong. But once you hit 40 and you hear it from all the old dudes in the hardware store, like, do what? It's like, there's a reason. Now, are they the best litmus test for? No. Am I still going to drop the hammer and try to stay strong in my 40s? Yes. Will the absolute number move? Hit or miss, but there is going to inevitably a time where, you mentioned gravity's undefeated. Time is also undefeated. Yeah. Although you could say, depending on your objectivity of space time, that gravity is the undefeated thing that moves space and time. But anyways, we could do a whole podcast on that. But it's the point being is, look, I understand that run groups are trendy. I understand that you want to wear Hoka shoes and not be called the fucking loser, although someone should if they're your true friend. But if you're in your 20s and 30s, may I suggest prioritizing getting brutally fucking strong now and then doing all the soft shit later?
Yeah. Dude, I couldn't agree more. And it's interesting to me that we've brought up CrossFit as much as we have in this episode. And maybe that's because CrossFitters are just not strong. But I competed in it for a while. I've coached a ton of CrossFitters. I still work with a handful of CrossFitters. But something I've always told them, and I think it holds true and it will always hold true, is that being strong makes everything easier. Right. And that holds true over the arc of life too, is being strong, and the higher that, to some degree, the higher that peaks, like in terms of even a normal person's strength, like you get a 25, 30-year-old dude to back squat 405, like that's a level of strength that will make everything easier down the road, like pending collateral and other outside factors. But the stronger you are, like pretty much anything you do physically is going to get easier because of that, right? There's going to be, of course, a point where it's a detriment. We're talking like the outliers. Yes. But in terms of like, if you're in it for longevity, get strong first, because that's going to make everything after that easier. It's going to make everything so much easier.
Yeah, like the longevity thing is almost antithetical to what it's trying to achieve, right? The longevity piece is staving off rather than striving towards, like I mentioned earlier. Like there's people who will speak of the benefits of resistance training on longevity. It's like we are so far off where the 8-ball should be, right? Like we're so far off the mark because the general physical culture is so deconditioned that we'll look at studies done on, like, let's say bone mineral density and the resistance training. Why are we studying this? Well, we're studying this because people didn't think that it was a useful idea to get strong in their 30s. And now all of a sudden we're like, we're praising exercise for bone. Like, why are we wasting our time and money on this? Right? Like, if you start weight training in your 30s and barring some sort of, cancer or some sort of terrible disorder, you should have fucking adamantium bones. You should be like fucking Wolverine, and they should be doing research studies on things more poignant than bone mineral density. And stop doing that fucking study, right? And I'll tell you why, when they're going to stop doing it, when 30 and 40-year-olds are so unbelievably jacked that they don't have to worry about fragile hip fracture, trochanteric, whatever the fucks, because everyone just lifts and the baseline for general physical preparedness of human beings is higher. Then you could start to actually study, like, well, what does resistance training do outside of this very obvious metric that we shouldn't have to track, because people shouldn't be so deconditioned to begin with, because they should have prioritized strength in a part of their life where they could do it the most, and they can carry that habit of strength into a sustainable bone mineral density. I was with Broderick Chavez the other day in Dubai, friend of the show. Shout out Broderick. Maybe a couple times I've mentioned him since that interaction. And Broderick squatted 800 pounds at 220 pounds. 800 pounds at 200 pounds body weight.
Oof.
He had an unfortunate break in his foot, multiple breaks in both of his feet. And being the brilliant dude that he is, before his surgery, they told him that they were going to put hardware in it, screws and plates and the like. And he's like, are you worried about my bone density given my relative strength? And they never had seen anything like him before. They're like, no, it should be fine. So a surgery that should have included multiple screws and multiple plates was one surgery that included one screw that broke in his bone, because he had such dense bones that it was a 4-hour surgery trying to extract out the fragments of the broken screw from trying to drill into the granite bone of fucking Broderick's navicular or whatever in his foot. And it's like, okay, how far along would we be in asking, pertinent questions and scientific inquiry around true health and longevity if everyone that came out of their 30s and 40s had solved this bone mineral density thing because everyone was just trying to get strong, right? Where would we be spending our resources? What questions would we be attempting to answer? But, we're all sitting there at these fucking biohacking old people plastic surgery Botox conferences where everyone's pretending that they're 30, but they look like 17-year-old lizards, and they're all fucking hailing resistance training, and they just started working out 2 years ago. And it's like, yeah, but this is meaningful data for you because you're so far behind the fucking 8 ball. But like in 20 years, if everyone got on their shit today and fucking started training at our age and stopped with this run club bullshit, or at least augmented the run club bullshit with actually getting strong, where would we be? What type of scientific inquiry would actually, because that surprises zero people, right? Broderick fucked up his feet like 20 years ago. Right? He knows the effects of resistance training on bone mineral density. He knows it all too well because they're picking out, fragments of a Phillips head screw or whatever the fuck it was out of his foot because he had granite for bones because he lifted heavy. So it's just really, and not upsetting, but it really lacks perspective when we start to talk about strength and longevity. Because like when the longevity crowd talks about strength, they're not talking about strength. Not like you and I are talking about strength.
No. Yeah. So if you're listening to this and you're not strong, you are responsible for the backslide of society. It's you.
They're like Smokey the Bear. Only you can prevent the pussification of mankind.
That's right. Don't be a pussy.
There you go. Well, on that note, I think we did it for now. Yeah. When we can expand on that, but like, I think looking at strength as a habit is a super useful way to get strong, right? Embodying the traits of strong people is unlike, whether it's success, whether it's financial success, whether it's whatever it is you strive to do. The straightest line, most useful advice you're going to give is, we had someone do this with our business a couple months ago. Like, who has already solved these problems? Okay, go ask them. It's like, all right, well, who's already done this? Okay, do what they do, and you will become them. There's not a evolution process where you become them without doing what they do first. And look, it's odd, right? Like it's weird. I remember being the kid that would just walk around with a chicken breast wrapped in tinfoil. at a party where people were drinking beer, and it's like, yeah. And then all of a sudden you're the big guy and everyone goes, well, yeah, that makes sense. But there was a time where I was like 170 pounds walking around with a chicken breast. Now I wasn't 170 pounds for long because I would walk around in public and eat chicken breast wrapped in tinfoil. Right. But there is like this awkward stage, like, what the fuck is this guy doing? And then like 6 months later, everyone's like, yo, that guy's huge. It's like, yeah, but I didn't get huge and then started eating the tinfoil thing. Right. So, you have to adopt the habits. And I think, hopefully some stuff we went over today will resonate with people. And if you have weak friends, send them this podcast. If you're a real friend.
Yeah. Don't be weak. I mean, the big takeaway on my side of this is don't be a pussy and do hard things continually.
Nailed it. All right. Well, until next time, guys, appreciate you guys hanging out. My co-host, Dr. at Red, White, and Jiunta, Red, White, and Jordan, at RX Radio. We'll see you guys next week.